to the next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
Motivates me every time. Welcome home, warriors. That's right, home. Why? Because if you're watching this show right now, it's either because someone showed you, shared with you, or you were just seeking the truth and you found your way to the Alpha Warrior Show. And I'm your host, Alpha. We don't censor. We don't sugarcoat stuff. We don't BS you. When it's theory, we tell you it's theory. When it's opinion, we tell you it's opinion. But a lot of stuff we put in front of you is facts that are hidden from you. And when you have information and you have the factual information, you just see the world in a different light. Or as in this series, you get to see the world through Gladio glasses. That's right, you guys. Operation Gladio, Part 6. I have the Colonel back with me. Just to remind you guys, Part 1, we covered terms in the intro. Part 2, we went into the relevance. Part 3, we were talking about patterns. Part 4, we went into the Congo. And in the last one, Part 5, we covered Flight MH17. And if this is the first time you're watching, well, you're going to enjoy the show, but you're going to be like, what's going on? All those parts will be linked in the description below, along with all the ways to follow the Colonel and go check out the stuff that she's doing on Rumble. So make sure you click on those links. But before we get there and we get into Part 6, and as I've been told, you're going to probably need 2 cups of coffee on this one. But let's get into some sponsors real quick, you guys. First on deck, Goldco, protecting your investments with gold and silver made simple. alphalikesgold.com. Ladies and gentlemen, the IRS, they've started to target me a little extra, and I've heard they're doing the same to a couple of you guys. They're a threat. We've got skyrocketing inflation, nearly $32 trillion in debt, $4.7 trillion, and new proposed taxes. You can imagine who's going to pay for that. Biden and his henchmen just won't stop. They're relentless, you guys. And now they've hired thousands of new gun-carrying IRS agents in all 50 states. Why? To come for your money. Things could get a whole lot worse for you and your family if you're not protected. That's why I've partnered with the top-rated precious metals company, Goldco. Goldco is a 6-time 5,000 winner, 2022 Company of the Year, and they've helped people like you and me place over $2 billion in gold and silver. And right now they're offering my supporters up to $10,000 in bonus silver while supplies last. Don't pass this offer up. Go to alphalikesgold.com right now. This is your opportunity to protect your family from out of control, corrupt government before it's too late. So don't wait a second longer, you guys. Take action. Click on the link that's in the description. You'll be glad you did. And at the very least, at least you empower yourself with some information. And then our last commercial, we're commercial free to the end of this. Or maybe we take a break, as I heard might be taking place in this one. So I'll see you guys in 60 seconds.
My Towels solved a problem that we've all had with towels. You go into the stores and they feel lotiony and soft, but then you get them home and they wind dry you. That's why I made My Towels. They actually work, they're soft, and they absorb. And now I'm excited to announce 2 brand new lines of My Towels. What makes them the best towels ever is they're now made with 100% long staple Shapir cotton. This is a combed ring spun cotton that makes My Towels even softer and more absorbent than ever. And now you get a 6-piece set for an amazing introductory sale price as low as $29.98. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code to get My Towels for only $29.98. Or you can get my designer premium line for just $20 more. Either way, you save 50% now on all My Towels. They actually work. What a concept. This offer won't last long, so please order now.
mypillow.com.
Great deals at my store, MyPillow, promo code Alpha. As I always say, when you support my sponsors, you support this show. And this show is supported by you guys. So just remember that no one controls the content we have here. Let me bring on the woman you guys really want to hear from tonight. The Colonel. How are you doing, ma'am?
Great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm rested. I feel energetic. It's almost like my maker said, "Oh boy, you need a rest for what's coming your way with the kernel." So I'm ready. I'm ready to get into this.
So we've talked about kind of the wagon wheel of Gladio, where you have the drug smuggling, the human smuggling, the weapon smuggling on the spokes, and it's kind of greased by blackmail to make the whole thing operate properly. And then the entire apparatus is Operation Gladio, where you have the stay behind units and the assassins and the people that commit terror and do all of those things. They use that wheelhouse, if you will, to carry out their operations. So that's kind of the overview. And when your background lends itself to have a discussion about the focusing kind of in a way on the drug aspect of it. So I put together what I thought was going to be kind of an hour's worth of material that was going to focus on that, because I thought it would be especially relevant to have that conversation with you with your background. What I uncovered was, again, with my Gladio glasses on, something I've not even voiced this outside of my house. Because I think it's startling. I think of all of the uncoveries or discoveries that I have made, this is probably the most bombshell of bombshells. So you have heard throughout your life, doing what you do, both in the military and in your civilian life, oftentimes, historically speaking, about Cuban exiles. You hear them talked about in relationship to like the JM wave that orchestrated supposedly the multiple assassination attempts on Castro, the Bay of Pigs. Cuban exiles have been referenced in so many different ways. When you talk about the Watergate break-in, half of the plumbers were Cuban exiles. You will hear them referenced in relationship to this crime or that crime internationally, not just in the United States. What if I was to tell you that the label Cuban exile is interchangeable with U.S. Gladio unit?
That's a strong label right there.
Okay, that's a question. So the title of this episode is, were the Cuban exile group the U.S.'s Gladio units? One of some. So I want everybody to have that in the back of their mind as we go through and we present facts, and I want you to make the decision. And I want to hear your rationing, Alpha, as we go through this, to either validate that question or offer a different alternative. So, as I said, everybody's heard about the White House plumbers, and half of them were CIA agents, and half of them were labeled as Cuban exiles. We've also heard Cuban exiles as it related to their proclaimed role in the JFK assassination. Many people believe that was a diversion, but again, they were talked about in relationship to the JFK assassination. So we know that the drug network was how Gladio was paid for, both the weapons, the drugs, and the human trafficking. But drugs were the number one way they paid for Operation Gladio. There were hundreds of billions of dollars that were generated over the years, if not trillions, when you go back to the late 1940s when this whole thing started. We also know that the war machine, whether it was the war in Vietnam, the war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, all in either a direct or indirect way protected the drug manufacturing operation. They guarded poppy fields. We had wars every place there was a prominent poppy field production capability. We also know that, I think we talked about, and I'll briefly review it. If you go back in history, you realize that China, who we like to label as the drug producers now, but for a very long time, the history of China and opium is very interesting because it was the British that introduced opium to China via India. So India was the large production of opium in the world. And the British, with India as their colony, was basically poisoning China with opium. They were drugging the population. And every time either the emperor or the empress would go to war with Britain to try to kick them out and get rid of the opium, the British defeated them. And that's how the British ended up with Hong Kong. It's how they ended up with Shanghai for a period of time. So those were referred to as the Boxer Rebellions or the Boxer Wars. So opium's now in China. They're growing it. You have a couple of people, excuse me, that preceded a guy by the name of Chiang, that what were generals in charge of the KMT army. So the KMT stands for a long Chinese name, but they refer to it as the KMT. So Chiang is a general that's in charge eventually of the KMT army. And he's working with first the French in taking the opium out of southern China and transporting it to the French Marseille, specifically through the Corsican Mafia and into the United States. Well, basically, we end up kicking the French out of the whole thing, destroying the Corsican production, which we'll go into, and taking over the entire route. Well, Mao comes to power in China and kicks Chiang out. Chiang moves to Burma, and the Burmese government eventually kicks him out of there. And that's around the time that World War II's winding down. So Chiang takes his KMT army, and he moves to what was then Formosa, which is now, he calls it Taiwan. So Taiwan, as an island, has now what they refer to as the Nationalist People's Republic of China. And Chiang converts his army of KMT soldiers into a political party. And he begins, at this point, he's the largest opium dealer in the world. He controls all of it via his army / political party. The KMT political party is still in power in Taiwan today. That's why all of this matters. Chiang was succeeded by his son. That family still rules Taiwan. I've often wondered if that's the reason why the US government will not part from the two-state policy. Like, they love the two-state policy when it comes to Israel, but when it comes to Taiwan, they have to recognize the one-state policy, because if you were to separate Taiwan from China, you wouldn't be able to say China's supplying drugs if in fact it was Taiwan. So that's why it's still very important and relative today to understand this history of where all of the opium power players ended up and what they look like today. So that kind of sets up the scenario of what we're going to get into. So when we went through the Eisenhower time frame, and Nixon, during the entire setting up of Gladio, which happens primarily during Eisenhower's administration, Nixon is the vice president. Nixon is going around working with the Japanese, and he, as you remember, is the first one to make this overture to China, but he's very keen on Japanese support. He actually makes a deal with the Japanese as it relates to some hidden gold that people refer to as Golden Lily, which is our book review that we're doing right now. to basically launder money that the U.S. controls as a part of those discoveries of stashes of gold that Japan put in the Philippines during World War II, to basically launder it back into his presidential campaign, both in 1960 against Kennedy, and then again when he ran against Johnson, when Johnson decided, or not against Johnson, sorry, when Johnson decided he was not going to run again, Nixon gets in on the Republican side. And keep in mind, this is the time RFK, Robert Kennedy, had decided that he was going to run, and he had just won the California primary, which at that point was kind of the gold standard for the Democrat Party. He was going to be the presidential nominee until he was assassinated as well. So eventually, we all know that in 1968, Nixon becomes president. So he also is reelected in the middle of a whole bunch of scandals in 1972, Nixon is. So he declares, and most of us lived through this big fancy war on drugs, how we're going to supposedly, we all thought that meant that he was going to get the drugs out of the United States. Unbeknownst to anybody in the United States other than the intel community, that's not what he meant at all. Nixon's war on drugs was to take out the Corsican Mafia, which was the competition to the CIA and NATO in the 100% dominant control of the global drug network. So during the course of his administration, they annihilate the Corsican Mafia. And the CIA, the precursor to the DEA, was called the BNDD, NATO, and the French president is all in on this. And they basically end up assassinating or blowing up or otherwise killing or imprisoning over 300 Corsican Mafia people and shutting down the largest laboratory that was in the form of a pharmaceutical company in Marseille, France. And it was under the guise of this pharmaceutical company that they were producing the number 4 whitest heroin ever produced in the world. And it's important to understand that they use pharmaceutical companies as fronts for drug production, as in illicit drugs, because if you go today and you look at how many pharmaceutical companies are on the very small island of Taiwan, there's over 50. So we're just going to leave that there. Nixon White House had set up 2 entities in 1971, 2 offices in the executive office of the presidency, not in a cabinet, actually in the executive office building. One of them was called the Special Actions Office for Drug Abuse and Prevention. The number 2 office was called Special Investigations Unit. The second one, called Special Investigation Units, was what people commonly refer to as the plumbers. Both of them, however, were focused 100% on narcotics. So there's a guy by the name of Egil, E-G-I-L, Krogh, K-R-O-G-H. He was the chief plumber. He replaced a guy by the name of John Ehrlichman. John Ehrlichman was a Stanford grad who Egil had met at a law firm prior to both of them coming over to the White House. So Egil had just graduated law school. He had basically a little bit of experience at this one law firm, but that was it. He was wet behind the ears, didn't really have any experience at all to be working at the White House. So it's really weird that he ends up here.
It's because he had another skill set, but they needed something to put on as a title.
Maybe had another skill set. That's an interesting way of looking at it. So he's basically named Deputy Assistant to the President for Law Enforcement. Huh. That's weird. And basically, within 3 years of him coming into the White House, he was in charge of both of those units in the executive office. So he's on record telling a narcotics expert / psychiatrist Dr. Daniel Friedman, that anyone that doesn't go along with his program will be destroyed. Croft eventually is jailed for breaking into Daniel Ellsbury, which is a doctor. Into Daniel Ellsbury's doctor's office. It was the office of Dr. Lewis Fielding. So I'm going to go through a couple of these people that are in this office because it provides the background for where we're going. Walter Minnick, Minnick, he's CIA. So they move him out of the CIA into the White House. Harvard graduate, and he basically is the one that drafted the what will come out of this office, which is the new DEA. He created the floor plan, if you will, for the new upcoming DEA. And that basically folded in all of these things that they're building within the White House and the BNDD. Another guy, John Caulfield, he's a New York City Police Bureau of Special Services, what they referred to as BOSS unit, which dealt with narcotics and terrorism. Interesting combination. He was a close friend of Nixon and Nixon's secretary that was famous for her deleting the tapes. A guy by the name of Miles Ambrose, who is the customs commissioner, very important when you're dealing with narcotics and the importation of them. Head of narcotics campaign domestic strike force. He joined the Department of Treasury in 1957, which is where the customs used to be. When he was appointed as chief coordinator of law enforcement, where he prosecuted gang members. That's a very important tidbit of information for dealing with what he's going to be dealing with in his new job. In 1960 to 1963, he was also the executive director of the Waterfront Commission of New York Harbor, where he prosecuted, quote unquote, organized crime figures. What he actually did was he prosecuted the organized crime figures of the Corsican mafia competition to the Italian mafia. And he also controlled the waterfront where all of the drugs came in from Cuba. So I want you to understand what we're stacking up here.
My brain's already putting some cards in play on what this guy was doing.
Okay. So he returned to legal practice in Washington, D.C. in 1963, and under his leadership, he oversaw the implementation of Operation Intercept, which consisted of searching vehicles entering the United States from Mexico. The program was discontinued within a couple of weeks. And the reason why this particular tidbit is very important is because Operation Intercept, while to you and I, in the war on drugs would sound, gosh, that's a great idea, right? Let's stop all of the cars, regardless of the time it takes to get in from, and arrest anybody bringing drugs in, right? Who would think that's bad? It wasn't done for that at all. The reason why they did it is because Mexico had dug their heels in and was not going to allow the United States to orchestrate the drug network, cartel network in Mexico the way they wanted it designed. And they basically threatened Mexico that if you don't do it our way, we're going to bring the border to a close. Operation Intercept was done to punish Mexico for standing up to try to rid Mexico of drug cartels. So, in 1972, as part of the executive office restructure for this drug network, he becomes director of an entity called Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement. Gotta love these names. Drug Abuse Law Enforcement. Not drug supplying law enforcement, like you're going after the suppliers, the drug abusers. Its acronym is ODALE, O-D-A-L-E. It's a law enforcement agency that was tasked with the U.S. federal government of aiding local drug enforcement, which basically means they took over local drug enforcement cases where they didn't want the person prosecuted or where they did want the person prosecuted. It was a total federalization of drug enforcement at the local level. That's what this program was all about.
Can't arrest the wrong soldiers.
And arrest the minor soldiers. He proposed the creation of the more encompassing DEA in 1973. He later marries a princess mafia by the name of Lorraine Genevieve's. Just so you can see where his loyalties lie. In July 1973, just as Ambrose, the guy we were talking about, was about to become the first DEA director, he abruptly resigns. And why did he resign? Well, he said it was to spend more time with his family and make more money to support his 6 kids. But actually, the reason why he had to resign and not go on to be the dictator over the DEA was it got leaked that he had spent several nights at a Texas rancher's house that was just indicted for trading weapons for drugs. So that didn't go over very well. And one of the, one of the quotes about it was, Mr. Ambrose, a special attorney general, director of the Office for Drug Abuse Enforcement and special consultant to the president, the New York Times reporter stated last November that Mr. Ambrose, while customs commissioner, spent 2 nights at Mr. Harper's ranch, the Encantada, which straddles the Mexican-American border with 3,800 acres in the U.S. and the remainder in Mexico. Mr. Harper is free on $25,000 bail, pending trial on weapons smuggling charges. Customs officials say that they strongly advised Mr. Ambrose not to visit the ranch, but he did not pay attention to him. And the officials of the Immigration and Naturalization Service corroborated the facts that this advice had been given. So that's very interesting. So you can see these people are not good people. Next on the list was G. Gordon Liddy. He was an FBI agent, narcotics, intel. He also had a job at Treasury and was fired and then hired by the White House. So he's fired by the Treasury Department and then hired into the Nixon administration. He also was involved in Watergate and the doctor's office break-in. His timing proved fortuitous. He arrived at the White House the day after the Pentagon Papers broke in June of 1971 and soon found himself assigned to work with the oddball team assembled to root out leaks and undermine the president. So men like Rand analyst Daniel Ellsberg, who was behind the Pentagon Papers revelation. And Daniel Ellsberg is the guy that was seeing the psychiatrist that they broke into his office. What's interesting about this is Rand is a CIA front company. So you have a guy working at a CIA front company, Rand, who they say was behind the leaking of the Pentagon Papers. So the plumbers basically broke into his psychiatrist's office. So you got to love these guys' names for their different entities. Not coincidentally, this J. Gordon Liddy nicknamed the team that he put together. It's a German name. And when you're talking about Gladio, when they default to German names, it's fairly important because they're all fascist and many of them loved Hitler. So this particular organization was nicknamed Organisation der Emeligen Schultz Staffel Anglohorgen, which gives you the initials Odessa, Odessa, which is very interesting. Which, if you don't know, is a name for a secret network of German SS officers during World War II. Oh, kind of like the guys that set up Operation Gladio. So are they setting up Operation Gladio out of the White House? That's the question that I have. At another point, they plotted how to firebomb the Brookings Institute as part of a plot to steal documents from the think tank. There's a guy by the name of Barker, which I think is hilarious because that's my maiden name. He had a network of Cuban immigrants, and he was tasked to build a squad of people to create counter demonstrations and interview people who he thought would impress Liddy with their toughness to be part of a network that Liddy was going to utilize, almost like a Gladio network. So between them, Hunt bragged to his partner that the men had killed 22 people, including 2 that they hung from garage beams. At the end of their conversation, the leader spoke in Spanish to Barker, who laughed, saying, quote, "He called you a falcon," unquote. Barker translated that back to Liddy, clutching his hands like talons, the bird other birds fear. That became Liddy's self-appointed code name for all of his future operations. They were going to refer to him as the Falcon. Hunt also recruited a locksmith who could serve as the team's covert entry specialist, a man who had once been part of a Cuban dictator Batista's secret police, which were the people that the CIA trained when they basically reinstalled Batista the second time in Cuba before Castro overthrew him. So Liddy was pleased by the viciousness of his new colleagues, and he pulled Croft aside, the guy that's in charge of the whole thing, and they basically says to him kind of out of the side of his mouth, "Hey, if you need anybody killed, just let me know."
Jeez.
So in January of that following year, materials in hand, Liddy basically goes to the Department of Justice, to Attorney General Mitchell's office. John Dean is present, and there's several other people there. And they come up with a overall scheme called Operation Gemstone. Operation Gemstone was made up of several different sub-operations, like Operation Diamond, Operation Ruby, Operation Emerald, and I won't go through all of them, but all of them are awful. And basically, it was how to do dirty tricks on everybody but the RNC. And they basically had talked about kidnapping anti-war movement leaders, drugging them, holding them in Mexico during the election cycle. He talked in words of comparing some of these operations to operations Hitler did. Like one of them, the kidnapping plot was referred to as Night and Fog, which was a similar 1941 directive that Hitler had done to disappear resistance leaders. So this guy's really hooked on Hitler. All of them were, which is kind of weird, you know, because we're in the United States and Hitler's supposed to be bad and we're not supposed to be doing anything about Operation Gladio, which kind of reeks of everything Hitler and Otto Skorzeny. But, you know, hey, maybe I'm reading too much into it.
Trust me, you're making me think of questions right now that I'm like,
Okay, so no one complained about his comparing these operations during this briefing to the Attorney General as odd, using Nazi language either. So basically, the AG's only comment was, how much was it going to cost? Not how weird everything was. And I'm talking about some of these things were weird. Like they were going to fly a plane next to a DNC aircraft, taking whoever their nominee was, and they were going to use electronic intercepts to record all of their conversations that's beaming off of satellites. They had some really weird, different operations in this whole thing. So he had them all on these charts that he was doing a presentation with. And basically, without going through all of them, there was money laundering, drugging people, blah, blah, blah. So you get down through all of them. Oh, and they also were going to hook up DNC people on a houseboat to blackmail them. That was part of it. They even got into the point about talking about which kind of ladies they were going to use to entrap people. So anyway, they say they need $1 million. Mitchell says, burn everything that you just showed me, and you got 250,000. And so they have to go back and they have to rescale everything. So basically, the death squads that were being set up by Hunt and Barker for a new national security organization above the CIA and FBI was part of conversations, not necessarily in front of the Attorney General. But Barker was to get 120 CIA-trained Cuban exiles for Operation Diamond, which was part of this whole thing, which would operate an undercover narcotics enforcement to kidnap and assassinate political enemies. And damned if that don't sound like Operation Gladio. So Liddy's gemstone plan would be kicked around throughout the campaign. And in the meantime, he and Hunt investigate the possibility of assassinating columnist Jack Anderson, who reports about the Nixon campaign's finances begin to stir up controversy. Because remember, I said at the beginning, Nixon had money laundered campaign contributions through the Japanese government that dealt with the gold that the U.S. was controlling, but no one knew about. Eventually, through somewhat hazy circumstances, later denied by virtually everyone involved, he received partial approval by April with his $250,000 to carry out some limited version of all of the gemstone plans. One of his team's first targets would turn out to be the Watergate. In June, Liddy's grandiose gemstone plans unraveled quickly in the wake of the arrest. He was fired and then promptly taken out to lunch by one of the campaign chairs at the White House mess. So he may have been fired, but he wasn't dismissed. There, campaign chair Maurice Stans asked what Liddy would do next. And he said, I'm going to keep my mouth shut and go to jail, basically inferring he wasn't going to die. So John McCord was also part of this. And I would refer to people, if you want to do a little bit more investigation on your own, you can just, and let's just run through this real quick. I'll show people, like when I come across people's name, I want people to be able to learn how to research on their own. So if you click even on Wikipedia on this guy, James W. McCord Jr., and just kind of scroll down, American CIA officer, first of all, right there in your face, they're telling you CIA runs Operation Gladio. So he's involved in Nixon's 1972 re-election campaign. So it corroborates what we're finding out, and that he was involved with the electronics part of the burglaries for the White House scandal. Tells you basically he's from Oklahoma, and that he was in World War II. Now, keep in mind, that part's very important because a lot of these people met during World War II while they were working for the OSS. And just because somebody says that they were in the military and not OSS direct, you have to understand that at that time during World War II in the European theater, they intermixed a lot. And then it says he went to school at Baylor University, which of course is in Texas, and the University of Texas in Austin. So you have to keep in mind, there is a huge contingent in Texas of these people that do these things because of if you zoom out to the 30,000 foot look, you realize that this is all being done for the international syndicate and their industrial extortion plans. So the reason why they went in and overthrew all the governments in South America and in Africa and wherever is they want their resources. So obviously Texas is a big oil energy presence in the state of Texas, and oil runs the world. So they overthrow Venezuela, they overthrow Dominican Republic, all for oil, Chile. So you have to keep in mind where these people are from. What's the industry of that area? So as soon as I see that he's from Texas, I'm like, okay, so he's part of the oil cartel. He also worked at the FBI and he worked at the CIA. Big deal. And then, oh, look, he was in charge of physical security at Langley. That means he knows everything about the coming and going of everybody. And Alan Dulles was Alan Dulles' top man, and Alan Dulles is the most corrupt guy in this entire story. So that's a big freaking deal. And the entire time, he was a reservist in the United States Air Force. Oh, and look at that. Counter intel program, Fair Play for Cuba Committee. So he's in the crux of the Cuban exile in the heart of Texas. So this guy's hitting on all cylinders at this point. So then, so it talks a little bit about what his role in the Watergate thing was. That's less important to our conversation about than where this guy was and what he has done. So that kind of gives you a flavor of what I'm looking for when I go through these things, in looking at how they fit into the overall Operation Gladio, number one, and the crux of what we're investigating at that particular time, which at this point we're trying to flesh out whether or not these Cuban exiles were actually our Gladio units. So let's keep going.
Before you go on to the next one, let me just read this last little short paragraph on Mr. James W. McCord Jr. I found this pretty interesting. It reads, and this is from Wikipedia, you guys. John M. Newman says in his 2022 book, Uncovering Popov's Mole, that Bruce Soley and McCord were probably KGB moles in the CIA's Office of Security, and that McCord very likely protected Soley and another mole, Pyotr Semyonovich Popov's honey-trapped and recruited by the KGB, dead drop a ranger, Edward Alice Smith, from being uncovered by U.S. intelligence. There's a lot going on right there.
There's a lot. The only thing that I would caution you on who they try to call out as KGB moles is most of the time Wikipedia is edited by the CIA. So a lot of times they throw shade on people because keep in mind, to them, everybody's a communist that's not manipulated by them. So it obviously there were Soviet moles. I'm not saying that there's not. That's my only caution in, just like we uncovered with Lumumba, if you are not manipulated by them, they will label you a communist. So just keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
So E. Howard Hunt, another one of the guys, this guy comes up in every Gladio operation I've researched to date. Every one of them, whether it's the Philippines, Europe, Southeast Asia, he's everywhere all the time. E. Howard Hunt's a CIA agent trained. Oh gosh, look at that! He trained Cuban exile forces. He was also part of the Trafficante Cuban narcotics mafia. Huh? You don't say. So he's working with Trafficante, and for those of you who don't know. Santo Trafficante was the he operated out of Miami, but his offices were actually in Tampa, Florida. And he was, so when the mafia there was a lot of conversation internal to the mafia back in the day, whether they were ever going to get into narcotics. They did the bootlegging thing, but many of the higher ups, like Luciano, they thought narcotics was disgusting. They did not want to be involved in it. But Lansky, and because Luciano gets deported to Italy, so Lansky kind of takes over for him, and Trafficante was like his narcotic czar. And so he kind of delegates that to Trafficani. Trafficani basically owns half of Cuba when the dictator was down there before their revolution and Castro took over. So Trafficani, very laid back. As a matter of fact, when they started doing the bust in Tampa, they couldn't pin anything on him because he was so good at hiring all of the underlings and camouflaging everything he did. But they do have records of him traveling to Vietnam and to Sicily and all these other people. So he definitely was involved, and he was orchestrating it, but he did keep a very low profile and non-attribution. He was very good at that. So tying E. Howard Hunt to the CIA, Cuban exiles, as their trainer, Operation Gladio, like Scorzini. And that would make a lot of sense because Scorzini, if you look at his travel records, he was everywhere all the time on the road. Because if you're going to be a spot trainer on and orchestrate operations, you travel to where these people are. You don't have them travel to you because there's records of every participant. So you go to them. And I find it very interesting that this ties E. Howard Hunt to the training of Cuban exiles. So
I want to bring up a photo of Santo Trafficante Jr. real quick that you're talking about. One, I just find it it's just so funny that you're talking this trafficking and smuggling and you got the word traffic in his last name. But when I was looking him up, as you're speaking about him, I'm like, this is just not what you picture in your head.
Nope.
When you're thinking about like these mafia style stuff. Yes, and but yet this was a dangerous man.
He was probably the most dangerous man out of all of them. He was silent but deadly. The rest of them were loudmouths. The rest of them were very in your face. He was not.
And I found this. Let me bring this up real quick too. It should take more than just a second to let me upload this, because it's recent. This is fairly recent. It's dated from April 5th, 2023, and I don't know if you've seen this in the course of your research, but it's an article out of it says Castro and Tampa Mafia connection, April 5th, 2023, and here you go.
Yeah. So we get to this eventually because you're going to find that the CIA was in bed with Castro. Nothing's like what you think it is. We funded Castro 100%. Weapons, everything, through the CIA, through these guys right here that I'm talking about. We're going to get to it.
Well, you can tell. I mean, as you're saying it, and I'm looking through my Gladio glasses, but also my operational glasses.
Exactly. That's why I got so excited after I did all of this work. I'm like, oh crap, this is right up Alpha's alley. I can't do this before I talk to him because you are going to add to it the entire, hopefully, in my opinion, the validation from an operational perspective that it all fits.
Well, you can tell from the beginning, from the gentleman that they put in charge of the ports and the street guys.
Right.
It's like
they handpicked these people to put them in this office.
It's man.
Okay, we're not even halfway through it yet. All right, so we're on E. Howard Hunt, former CIA officer, and just for the record, there's no such thing as a former CIA officer. They like to use that when they move them into a new role. He was always working for the CIA. They like saying former, so that means they're going to give him a more important mission and they want non-attribution. That does not mean he's not working for the CIA. So he becomes basically a novelist where he writes these spy novels as supposedly what his new job is. But of course, we know book writing is money laundering, and that's just how they're going to pay him. They are probably written by someone else. They just put his name on it so they can find a way to pay him money and him not be on the active CIA payrolls. So that's a tidbit for future reference as well. So Hunt himself seemed an unlikely clandestine operator, a father of four, large house, urban Maryland, had horses, stables, split his time between being the president of a company called Mullen and Company, which of course is a PR agency. That's another thing that I have found. When a lot of these people hide in PR agencies, Lansdale, who supposedly ended up being a general, which is just garbage, he was a CIA operative, and he supposedly was fat, dumb, and happy in San Francisco in a PR company, and then all at once ends up, as a result of World War II, being part of the CIA. PR agency is a cover for psychological operations. So they use PR agencies to mold public opinion. They write copyright. They can provide it to the media. They do sound bites. That's all the PR agency is for. So this guy's very well rounded. He also does consulting work at the White House, where he actually was giving an office in the old executive building, which is where this whole operation's being ran out of. Not a coincidence. So while working for the agency in assignments like helping to overthrow the communist government, communist in parentheses, because they were not communist, of Guatemala, Guatemala is the guy that wanted to give all the property back from the banana company, United Fruit, that the Rockefellers owned with the CIA. He wanted to give the property that, so Guatemala, just for you to know, because I want everybody to understand how important this is. This is the guy that helped give Guatemala back to the Rockefellers and the CIA. They had installed a dictator. The people overthrew the dictator. The CIA and the US government labeled the people that overthrew and duly elected, democratically elected, a real president for the first time in decades. They called that guy a communist because he wanted to give the property back to the people that Rockefeller, not buying, had confiscated from the dictator government and was growing fruit. The CIA set up United Fruit. It was used as a cover to fly operations out of Guatemala and take over other countries down there. And they owned 42% of the land in Guatemala and paid zero taxes to the people. They used the people to harvest bananas and everything else down there as slave labor. So that's how you get cheap bananas. And when this president came to power through an election, they immediately went in, they meaning E. Howard Hunt and the CIA, and couped him again. And it ended up on that time, like 30,000 people died in the aftermath.
I got to interrupt here for a second, Colonel, because you're talking about these offices, these people being moved into the old executive office and the position of these offices. And my gang office, when they developed the new gang office, when our agency said, hey, in addition to the regional gang office, we want an independent gang office too. The police department is attached to the city building. There's a foyer between us, but essentially it's just one big, huge building. Well, the office they moved us into used to be, I shit you not on this one, it was U.S. Senate Barbara Boxer's office, where they positioned our gang office. And as I'm listening to you say all these things, I'm like, did they just put our gang office where you had some of the most highly sensitive and classified information into the investigations we were doing, to include things like MS-13? Was that why this office was positioned there? Because there's already components to monitor and track what's being said in there.
I would bet you $100.
It's just,
I would bet you $100.
Yeah, if anybody goes and you look up U.S. Senator Barbara Boxer's Cathedral City office, and that is where my gang office was.
I'd bet you $100. So, while working for the agency, he does the whole overthrow of the Guatemalan government. He also was intricately involved in the Bay of Pigs invasion with the Cuban exiles / Gladio operators. And he also is operating under the State Department as a cover to work with dissidents and assess political parties and spread propaganda back, via his PR background. So Hunt meets with a guy by the name of Manuel Artime, Artime. He's interesting because Artime was the nephew of a popular Cuban poet and was raised as a devout Catholic Jesuit. In 1957, he became a member of an organization called Radical Liberation Party, a Christian democratic group. He graduated as a doctor and planned to become a psychiatrist. Part of Castro's rebels, and in 1959, the CIA arranged for him to travel to the U.S. on a Honduran freighter ship. He worked closely with the CIA in recruiting and organizing Cuban exiles in Miami for future actions against the Cuban government. And this is, make sure you're following this. This is the CIA embedding themselves and recruiting people in Castro's rebels against the Batista government that they installed. They do this so they can control both sides of the outcome. So if the Cuban Revolution actually goes as the Cuban rebels want, they will have gotten in good and have insiders in Castro's organization so that if they can't control Castro, they have people inside to kill him. While at the same time, they are funding Batista's fight against Castro's revolutionary army. So understand that. They do this every single time. They arm both sides. And if it's not the US, they'll just have Mossad do it, or they'll have Germany do it. But they control both sides. So Artime and 9 fellow quote-unquote recruits were transported by CIA agents to an island off of Fort Myers called Usepa. And I'll just let you know, I've been to Usepa 100 times. One of my best friends had a house down there. And they were operating at this time a office there to do physical and psychological assessments on recruits there. And I find that fascinating. So oftentimes in Operation Gladio, they do these types of things where they do the assessments and the training in small islands off of mainland coast. They did it in Spain. They did it in Portugal. They did it in Italy. Obviously, they did it in Florida. And this is back in the 1960s. So Artime and 27 others were taken by land and air to a base in Panama, and then they were given paramilitary training at the schools of America. Damn, where have I heard that before?
Yep.
Isn't that where we sent all the Gladio operators for every other South American dictatorship that we were going to use? Why, yes, it is. So, also, I was dumbfounded when I found all of this out about Hunt. I've read about Hunt in every one of these Gladio books and knew none of this stuff about him. So, all right. So anyway, Hunt meets this guy, this Manuel Artime. So I told you a little bit about him. And he uses Artime to set up hit teams to liquidate narcotics dealers. Primary target was going to be Panama's General Torrijos. Terry Jose. It's, you tell me how to say it. Torrijos.
Torrijos. Torrijos.
Okay, so that guy. I'm gonna call him General Omar. So he's a Panamanian general, and E. Howard Hunt is going to use this Artime guy to kill him, assassinate him. And The reason why they hated him is because he was the guy that eventually did the negotiation. He was a very strong leader, and he did not like the United States. He eventually is the one that is credited with getting the canal back for Panama. So they probably should have took him out while they had a chance. And again, you can look that guy up if you want, but he definitely was not one of their players. So another one of this group was Lucien Koenig, Conein. He actually was a double agent for the CIA. And by that, I mean, he's from a French family. So he originally worked inside of the Corsican mafia and knew everybody in that, and in the French government and the French Secret Service and their Operation Gladio network. Well, he eventually gets recruited for the CIA and basically becomes a spy for the CIA on all of those operations. So he is instrumental in eliminating the Corsican mafia with intel that he provides to the CIA to take them all out, which is basically eliminating the CIA's competition. So he was recruited back when Donovan was working in the OSS and primarily in the Southeast Asia theater. This Conan guy worked with Paul Helliwell, Lansdale, and all of the mafia that was setting up operations in Vietnam and taking over that market from the French. And this is the guy that actually brought in Hunt while E. Howard Hunt while they were all in Vietnam. So the last guy, I think he's the last guy. Yeah, the last guy is David Young. They referred to, that's where they got the name plumbers, is because David Young's family was in the plumbing business, and he was told that he's a lawyer. He was recruited to plug the leaks. So he jokingly referred to them as plumbers. And that's kind of where the name came from. He was plucked out of the NSC staff working for Kissinger, who was CIA, of course, we know. So Henry Kissinger's spy in the entire operation was David Young. So everybody's got their fingers in this pie. The CIA does, the drug people do, the national security staff does. So this is a whole of government effort to set up what I'm going to make the case is our Operation Gladio in the United States. So Hunt and Liddy works in room 16 of the executive office building. This was the group's secret narcotics office, also referred to as the Committee to Re-elect the President, or CREEP, was also in this same office. So keep in mind what they were doing. These are the group that is going to try to sabotage the DNC and get President Nixon elected through dirty tricks. So it's important that you have his re-election committee co-located with this same group. And again, isn't it irony that the acronym is CREEP? Right? So the first thing they do is they're going to break into that doctor's office. Bernard Barker, Eugenio Rolando Martinez, and Felipe de Diego, all three of which are basically Cuban exiles and or Gladio, and CIA. So they also were intimately involved in what was called Operation 40. Operation 40 was the code name for a CIA-sponsored counterintelligence group composed of who? Cuban exiles. So I'm going to argue that Operation 40 is our Operation Gladio. They actually even had a name for it. The group was formed to seize control of the Cuban government after the Bay of Pigs. Operation 40 continued to operate unofficially until it was disbanded in 1970 due to allegations that an aircraft that was carrying cocaine and heroin in support of the group crashed in California, and Traficante's boats were raided in Cuba. And while they say it ended, they didn't actually end operations. They just basically disbanded, calling it Operation 40. Meanwhile, Croft worked on the narcotics control with the BNDD, which, as I said earlier, that's the precursor to the DEA. They take over all customs international narcotics programs from the BNDD. Croft tells the BNDD, John Ingersoll, to provide good stats to Congress and press to encourage the realignment. And basically what that meant was to lie to Congress, basically saying that the amount of people addicted to heroin was going down based on the war on drugs, which it was not. Croft named to direct newly formed cabinet committee called the Committee on International Narcotics Control. He is working with state, BNDD, CIA, and Kissinger to coordinate the international struggle against narcotics. That was their mission, but of course we know that's not what they were doing. Nelson Gross, Gross, supervised the efforts and was later jailed for bribery and tax evasion. His political career ended in 1974 when he was convicted on federal charges of basically illegal campaign contributions, which is irony. So these people are all a bunch of crooks, is what we're discovering. After Gross's prison term, he went on to form a very, very lucrative business in real estate development and restaurateurs. And let me stop there because this is another pattern. If you are making billions of dollars on illegal drug trafficking, you have to have a place to launder the money. Real estates and restaurants are two of the best places to do that.
Maricopa County.
Huh?
I was just throwing in Maricopa County.
Maricopa County. So this guy, after his prison sentence, is obviously hired, this Gross guy, he's hired to be the money launderer. So it looks like he has this, he's a multimillionaire, but oddly enough, he ends up murdered in 1997, but not before he marries a Guggenheim heiress. That's odd, right? So Gross served in 1969 as the coordinator for international narcotics matters in the State Department and was sent by the Secretary of State, William Rogers, to where? Uruguay. Oh, and shortly after he was there, they had a coup. But the CIA guerrilla activities began right around the same time that this Gross guy makes his first appearance for the State Department in Uruguay. So the State Department guy suggests sending Gross to prompt the extradition of a drug smuggler from France by the name of Auguste Ricord, R-I-C-O-R-D. And they want him because he's a kingpin in the Corsican mafia. Well, what happens is Uruguay, who's made tons of money because of this guy in the money laundering of drug activity in Uruguay, the government of Uruguay makes a deal with the government of Paraguay and says, hey, we're going to give him to you. You arrest him and put him in jail, but leave the door open. So Ricord ends up in jail in Paraguay, but his restaurant that he owns there is bringing his food 3 meals a day, and his family walks in and out of the jail at will. So he's basically being protected by the Paraguay government while the U.S. is trying to extradite him. And the only reason the U.S. wants to extradite him is because they want to kill him because he's the competition. And once they get him, they can get the rest of them. That's literally what we're doing here. So he was eventually extradited to the U.S., where he was sentenced to 22 years in federal prison for federal drug trafficking charges. He served 10 years in prison until being released. Ricord returned to Paraguay in 1983 and died mysteriously 2 years later. But Paraguay, let's see. Oh, that's the part I've already talked about. So basically, the way the U.S. got him to the States was they told Paraguay they were going to withhold, oh gosh, see if this sounds familiar. We're going to withhold $5 million in aid and lines of credit until you give us who we want.
I remember a certain quid pro quo that sounds very similar to that.
Right.
In Ukraine, of all places.
So what they wanted him also for is because keep in mind, they're building a narrative of how tough on drugs they are as a disguise for transitioning the drug pipeline to the control of the CIA. So they wanted a feather in their cap by saying they got the biggest drug trafficker in the world off the streets in the form of this record guy because he was in charge of the Corsican mafia. And by he technically, because he was a French citizen, he should have been extradited to France. They had already tried him and sentenced him in absentia. And so technically, because there was already a conviction, France had the upper hand in extraditing him. But again, the U.S. coerced Paraguay by withholding money from them to get him into the United States. They immediately put him in a trial. And of course, then he's convicted. So they've got a big feather in their cup of how it's all a psychological operation. They weren't cracking down on it. No one knew that this guy at that point was not even in France. He wasn't in control of the Corsican. I mean, he was, but from far away. And his conviction basically had no effect on the pipeline. As a matter of fact, once they did convert it over to America, within 2 years, the number of addictions went from 315,000 to 560,000. That was the reality, while your television set is telling you something different. So back to Nelson Gross. There's a retired agent, FBI agent by the name of Robert Bukowski. He basically was an FBI agent for 25 years. And prior to his appointment in the FBI, he spent 5 years at NCIS. And he was assigned to the International Domestic Terrorism, Foreign Counterintelligence, and Violent Crime Unit when he was in the FBI. He worked high-profile investigations in terrorism, kidnapping, homicides, organized crime, and multi-state violent gangs. And Bob reviewed multi-state and multi-agency investigations of kidnapping and murder of Nelson Gross. So the guy we've just been talking about, Gross, he gets murdered. And supposedly, if you look up the information on his murder, it tells you that 3 teens were eventually charged and convicted of kidnapping him. And basically, tell me if this makes any sense. It's hard for me to even say it. So in the one newspaper clipping that we found that talked about it, it said that he went out to his car, Gross did. Now, keep in mind, this is a multi-millionaire, right? Working for the mob, the CIA, everybody. So he's not situationally unaware. And these Hispanic sounding name, quote unquote, teenagers, like Cuban exile people, supposedly at gunpoint, walk this guy across the street where there happens to be an ATM, and he got out $20,000. Tell me how in 1970 you withdrew $20,000 out of an ATM.
You're not even going to do that if you want to right now.
Thank you. So nothing about the story makes any sense, but unfortunately they convict these. One was 18 and the other 2 were underage. So I want to pause for just a second and let you know who this guy is that supposedly this highfalutin Bob Bukowski of 25 years FBI and all of this NCIS and counterintelligence guy. Let me tell you who he is that wrote the story on what actually happened. I should say created the story. Because Bob was a team leader in the 9/11 investigation. He also was interviewed by the 9/11 Commission Committee. Bob also was a joint terrorist task force in both New York City and New Jersey. And he oftentimes was employed by the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York on matters about criminal justice. So Bob seems to be a plant.
Well,
He
the other
seems to
thing,
testify every time a Gladio operation happens.
here's something interesting too, Colonel. I'm finding lots of stories about him, but I'm struggling on finding a Wikipedia page on him. Like, it's
Yeah.
like,
Oh, like we might be trying to hide him?
yes.
Okay. So back to the Egil Croft guy. Now, keep in mind, he's in charge of the whole executive office. Of all the people we just went through, this is the leader, the guy that was fresh out of college, no bona fides whatsoever. We're going to put him in charge of both of those offices that we've set up that's controlling both domestic and international drug everything, right? Egil Croft. So he's collecting all of the narcotic work from throughout the executive branches. You know, we brought in the customs piece. So he's got it all. Oh, and they also bring in all of the intelligence gathering from the narcotics angle so they can control information. So then they decide that they're going to pursue, they can decide who to pursue and who not to pursue. Because basically, they're the ones that make the decisions on where to prioritize the resources to go after people. So Hunt says that they need to create an Office of National Narcotics Intelligence, ONNI. Hunt offers his services to staff the ONNI with Lucien Koenig, the Corsican mafia guy, who's a double agent for the CIA. He's going to be in charge of it. However, Nixon decides he's going to pick not Lucien Koenig. He's going to pick that Brukowski guy. The guy that comes up with the cover story for them knocking off that millionaire, he's going to be in charge of collecting intel. So prior to his appointment, he had spent the 5 years at NCIS. And I talked about what he did at the Bureau, and he basically worked on, terrorism, kidnapping, homicide, organized crime, and violent gangs. Isn't that everything that Gladio does? Why, yes, it is. So,
You want to make sure you never get caught, just run the organizations that investigate it.
Correct. Okay. So, let's see. Sullivan, let's see, who's this guy? All right. So there's a guy by the name of Sullivan. I have his first name down a little bit farther. He basically led the highly controversial unit called COINTELPRO. And if you don't know what that is, if you look that up, it's basically a covert counterintelligence program that was set up under the FBI, and it kind of ran roughshod over all of the political dissidents. So if you are going to set up a Gladio operation like the one that they did in Italy, and all of the people that were against the party that the CIA and the intel community was setting had decided was the one they were going to support, if you could create an organization that was against all of the rest of them, that would be COINTELPRO. So if you look at them online, they were against the anti-Vietnam War organizers. They were against all of the civil rights people. They were against Martin Luther King, the Nation of Islam, Black Panthers, animal rights. So basically, these are the guys that I don't know how else to describe it other than to tell you that's Gladio. They're the ones that were surveilling all of the other groups that would jeopardize government control of the United States, because you're not allowed to talk out, right? So you have to have these initiatives in order to shut those people up. That's what they're creating here. So that's what basically COINTEL Pro was set up to do. They monitor. They were the ADL before the ADL. That's probably a better way to say it.
Here's an
or the Southern Priority Law Center.
Here's an old New York Times article that says, COINTELPRO, the FBI's secret war on political freedom.
There you go. And it's still going today. That was just the first iteration. So they also were responsible for assassinations, imprisonment, public humiliation, and charging Americans with political opposition and civil rights crimes. They were a series of covert and illegal projects conducted between 56 and 71 by the United States FBI, aimed at surveilling, infiltrating, discrediting, and disrupting American political organizations that the FBI perceived as subversive. Right?
That sounds
What's that sound like?
Mighty familiar.
That sounds mighty familiar. And that's why I knew that I had to do this with you.
And then Alpha finds his way tangled into the story.
Is this amazing? And I mean,
it's January 6th. It's parents, looking into the schools.
Yes.
It's if you're considered, against the government's idea of open borders.
Yes.
This is the group that's gonna
right
here.
Yes.
This is FBI.
Yes.
American terrorism motto: spy on citizens daily. COINTELPRO. The only question is, it didn't end in 1971. Everybody, it's still going on right now.
Correct. And that's what to me is the most amazing part of all of this. When you start looking back over it, that's how, to me, you validate the fact that this, number one, is Operation Gladio, and number two, that it's still going on. I don't know how we missed all of this. I mean, obviously the stuff happened in the 60s and even the mid 70s. I was a teenager in the mid 70s. I wasn't paying attention, but the older people are. Why are they not saying, hey, this shit went on and this isn't good? We were told that it stopped, but it didn't stop.
Well, part of it is we as the people have never controlled the ability to do true communication and journalism. And every time somebody has, they've been deplatformed, or, I mean, I was going to wait till the end, but I'll mention it now and you can come back to it, at the end of this episode. But listening to everything you're talking about, Colonel, everything, all the way back to the variables of Watergate. And it just brings up a case that a lot of people have heard about, but don't know a lot about. And it's Seth Rich.
Yes, absolutely.
That sounds exactly like what you're talking about in present day, all the way to his murder.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I would argue that they sent a hit squad. And that it was part of this whole thing. And eventually
the rumors that came out around it on that one was we shifted from Cuban Latin names to MS-13 possibly being behind that.
Correct. And that's not unlike switching from anti-communist to Islamic radicals, right? They have the ability to morph the projected enemies. We've seen that. So eventually this Sullivan guy, he gets appointed as the ONNI in June of 1972, which it happens to be right after Hoover dies he died in May. So this Sullivan guy gets appointed as the ONNI in the executive branch because they didn't like each other. So Sullivan came, let's see, there's a Robert Novak who is a CIA agent, and he's talking, saying that Sullivan came to our house in Maryland suburbs in June of 1972 for lunch and a long conversation about my plans for a biography of Hoover, a project that I had abandoned as just too ambitious of an undertaking. Before he left, Bill told me someday I probably should read about his death, and it would be in some kind of accident, and for me not to believe it, that it would be murder. So Sullivan, after he took this job at ONNI, he disagreed with the political targeting of people and was very vocal about that. And so basically in this lunch conversation, he happens to mention to Robert Novak that he's likely going to end up dead. Well, this is in May of 1972. In November 9th, 1977, days before he was to testify in a House committee on assassinations, 20 minutes before sunrise, Sullivan was walking through the woods near his retirement home in New Hampshire on the way to meet hunting companions, and another hunter that was 22 years old and son of a state policeman took a telescopic rifle and shot him dead. Now, of course, because it was a 22-year-old, they basically said it was a mistake. There was no charges. Interestingly enough, this guy that did this had a gun school whose name was Cloak and Dagger.
Oh, come on, Colonel.
I'm not lying. Not lying. Also found this, Mr. Sullivan's 30-year career in the FBI began in the early days of World War II when he was dispatched by Hoover on an undercover intel operation to where? Spain, which is where Otto Skorzeny was. So the whole thing, obviously at this point, everybody realizes we're way outside of the coincidence time frame, right? So all of this stuff cannot be a coincidence. So what happens when with Koenig, since Sullivan got his job? So Sullivan was the ONNI and until he died. And then Koenig is assigned to the BNDD as a strategic intel officer. Now, remember, the BNDD has basically kind of been gathered up into and is under the control of this executive office in the White House. So he's kind of still involved in this. And he controlled all of the overseas narcotics intel, where Sullivan, up until he's murdered, handles all the domestic stuff.
Now, real quick, let me ask you, Colonel, are you familiar with looking into Sullivan, what the acronym DDCI stands for, or USIB? And the reason let me just bring it up on the screen. While you've been speaking about them, I've been looking at documents around them. This one's dated, and this is from the Internet Archive, December 1st, 1972. It has the approval for release from the CIA. And it says, memorandum for the Director of Central Intelligence, subject, meeting with Mr. William Sullivan, Director, ONNI. But what caught my attention is, like you said, cloak and dagger, coincidences. And it says, at your direction, I met for 40 minutes. And there's this, there's messages within messages sometimes. And when we talk about Operation 40,
correct,
and then you want to throw out 40 minutes, it's just like, there's communications within communications. And when I see this, especially hearing this fresh conversation from you, it just sticks out to me on this stuff. Like, yes, you can say 40 minutes, but more likely we're people, we round up. Oh, we met half an hour. Oh, we met for an hour. We don't say we met for 40 minutes.
No,
it's not natural.
It is
possible, but not natural. And just looking at what surrounds all this, but at the end of this document, when it's signed, it's CC to the DDCI, and executive secretary for the
So
U.S.
DCI is the deputy to the that's the number 2 guy at the CIA. So it's the director of Central Intelligence, the deputy to the director of Central Intelligence.
Gotcha. Okay. Let me pull that off.
All right. So let's get back to the
And for those
so
watching, all the links of things that I've been pulling up while the Colonel's talking, those will all be down in the description if you want to further dive into them.
okay, so we've established that now the White House is controlling all international drug trafficking, both external and internal. The Office of Drug Abuse Law Enforcement, ODELI, was set up for domestic, which was created by Gordon Liddy. We talked about that earlier. It was a domestic strike force headed by Miles Ambrose. We went over his career. He proposed the creation of a more encompassing DEA. And see, I think this was the purpose of all of this, is to gather it all together and then use the fact that you have now got all of the strings, and you're going to now create and spawn off its own entity called the DEA that is now going to have all of the pieces of a global narcotics control network under the auspices of someone that you control. And the Cuban exile or Gladio unit is going to be the paramilitary organization that empowers this entity to be able to control the moneymaker aspect of drug trafficking. So, let's see, this guy, Miles Ambrose, was intricately involved in that. He also was part of the inauguration committee for the Bush Reagan campaign in 1980. He served as the chairman of the board of an organization called DATOP, which was, and you can't make this up either, a drug addiction treatment organization. So this is the same guy that was married to the mafia princess Lorraine Genevieve's. DATOP, or DATOP Village, was a drug addiction treatment organization with facilities in New York City. It was originally founded in 1963 by a guy by the name of Daniel Casriel, Casriel, along with Monsignor of the Catholic Church, William O'Brien. He was a Catholic priest and founder of a thing called the World Federation of Therapeutics Communities. So these people were part of an organization called Synanon, Synanon. Synanon was an organization that was the very first in-residence drug rehab program. And they dealt with a confrontational approach called attack therapy and behavior modification. And they dealt with addicted treatment methods. It was investigated as one of the most dangerous and violent cults in America. And it was set up with the help of the Catholic Church. So what I found interesting about this, and this is the same guy, by the way, that got in trouble for staying with the drug dealer in Texas, the gun and weapons dealer, is not unlike the whole fluoride back in the day in the 1930s and 40s, where you had all of the aluminum and steel manufacturing, and then later on the Manhattan Project that was creating all these fluoride byproducts and poisoning people in the local area, and the soaring rate of cancer was isolated to those areas. So they decided to fluorinate everybody's water and distribute it so it can't be noticeable. And at the same time, one of the biggest offenders in the aluminum business was Kaiser, who then what do? Oh, they set up medical facilities. Because if you're going to poison the entire world or the entire United States through putting fluoride in their water, you might as well cash in on that too and create a medical system. So basically, that's what these guys do. They're trafficking in drugs. And so what do? They want to capture the treatment facilities for it. And so they go right into jump in bed with the Catholic Church and create these treatment facilities so they can, quote unquote, treat all of the poor people that have been exposed to these drugs that were exposed on purpose. So White House wants more from the BNDD overseas. So Dr. Thomas Ungerleider, why does all these people sound like they're German?
Yes.
But I digress. He's a member of a commission on drug abuse, interestingly enough. So he has conversations with BNDD and want to create assassin squads like the ones they have in South America. Their goal is to have 150 key assassins. So the entire heroin refining operation can and use those so that they can throw the current, because this is, I regressed a little bit. This is when they were trying to overthrow the Corsican mafia thing. So they want to grow assassins so they can use them to throw this heroin refining operation into chaos so they can take it all over. So this Room 16 raises funds and probably through the drug sales. And they use those funds to sabotage George Wallace, Hubert Humphrey, Edmund Muskie, George McGovern, and Howard Hunt. Basically, in one of the episodes of their dirty tricks, actually poisons Muskie's lemonade with LSD, which he did it right before his speech. And evidently there's this infamous speech where he starts crying and starts acting really bizarre, and it totally screwed up his presentation and basically derailed his political campaign. And what's weird about that is as soon as I read that, I started thinking about that one speech that Howard Dean gave that he went totally ballistic. Do you remember that?
I'll have to look it up.
He was yelling at the camera. He's screaming at people. And I'm like, wow, if they do this, I wonder if they did that to him.
Well, while you were talking about Dr. John Thomas Ungerleider, right? I was looking him up, and right when you brought up LSD, this is one of the sentences I read from him, because he ended up becoming a professor at UCLA out here in California. And it says, and like I said, these links will be down in the description for anybody that wants to look further into this. He began surveying patients at Timothy Leary's ranch in Orange County and became one of the first researchers to document the adverse effects of LSD.
MK Ultra.
It's like, and so, and this is, just real quick, segue, guys. This is how real-time investigations take place. You see this, you hear this, you read it, then you look up Timothy Leary's ranch. Who are the people behind that? Who financed it? Who's the Leary family? Where did they get it from? Where's it at? And what's it come? Now, I haven't looked far into it, but it says the San Jacinto Mountains. Let me tell you something else that's out in the San Jacinto Mountains, the headquarters for Scientology.
What?
Guess what else goes on in San Jacinto? Out here, because it's only about 25 minutes from me on the other side of the mountains. We know that out here as the heart of drugs. That's where if you want to find the meth houses, if you want to find, where do you go? You go to San Jacinto. It's just.
How about that?
You're making my brain spin right now, Colonel.
Okay. So now we're going to introduce Frank Sturgis, Sturgis. He worked for Santo Trafficani in the mob. He also worked for that organization called CREEP on narcotic works, chicken in the hen house thing. He also took special assignments from those narcotic workers. In 1956, Sturgis moved to Cuba and went to Mexico, Venezuela, Costa Rica, Guatemala, Panama, and Honduras. And what's interesting about that is those are all of the countries that ended up getting couped. Sturgis moved to Miami in 1957. They began an arms and munitions smuggling operation into Cuba bound for the rebels of Fidel Castro. They were sending money to Mexico to support Fidel Castro, whose 26th of July movement had arranged a meeting between CIA Inspector General Lyman Kirkpatrick and the representatives in 1957 by Pepin Bosch, Bosch. He was an executive of the Bacardi Corporation, as in rum. So Prio asked Sturgis to go to Cuba to join up with Castro and to report back to the exiled powers in Miami. So he went down and met with Castro, while Richard Sanderlin traveled to the Sierra Madre Mountains in Cuba, where he began training the Castro rebels. So again, Gladio operations where we are training these people out of the CIA, where he began. Okay, so their training consisted of military strategy, tactics, weapon handling, and hand-to-hand fighting. Sturgis also became involved in gun running to Cuba, along with mobster Santo Trafficani, and not surprisingly was arrested for illegal possession of arms, but was released without any charges. That's how you know he's connected. 1959, Sturgis had contact with casinos in Cuba, and some say met with Louis McWillie, a mobster of Trafficani's man in Cuba, and the manager of the Tropicana casino, who by his own testimony was a known acquaintance of Jack Ruby, because Jack Ruby ran casinos and gambling houses in Dallas for the mob as well. Sturgis offered to train Castro's troops in guerrilla warfare. Castro accepted the offer, but he also had an immediate need for guns and ammo, so Sturgis became a gun runner, using money from the anti-Batista Cuban exiles in Miami, i.e. Gladio, and some suspect the CIA, which are one and the same. Sturgis purchased boatloads of weapons and ammunition from the CIA weapon experts Samuel Cummings International Armament Corporation in Alexandria, Virginia. Sturgis explained later that he chose to throw in with Castro rather than Prio because Fidel was a soldier, a man of action, where Prio was a politician, a man of words. So in March of 1958, Sturgis opened a training camp in the Sierra Madre Mountains where he taught Che Guevara and other 26th of July movement rebel soldiers guerrilla warfare. Oh, who did that? Us. When Castro seized power, a rebel firing squad on San Juan Hill executed 71 of their opponents on January 11th, 1959, into an awaiting 40-foot ditch that had been opened up by a bulldozer. Although Sturgis did not take part in the actual execution, he was photographed afterwards holding a rifle on top of the covered mass grave. Castro then appointed Sturgis gambling czar and director of the security and intelligence for the Air Force, in addition to his position as a captain in the 26th of July movement. Sturgis went to Miami on June 2nd, 1959, with Alan McDonald, while, quote, supervising the investigation of several American gamblers with criminal records that operate casinos in Havana, unquote. They requested from Metropolitan Criminal Intelligence Supervisor Frank Capel information on both Myers and Jake Lansky, Joe Salisi, aka Joe Rivers, and Santo Trafficani. That was provided to them 6 days later after the Cuban government sent an official written request. Sturgis at some point joined the CIA accusation of Castro being a communist, despite him seeking assistance from the UN and the US. It was at this point that the anti-Castro forces took shape, from the pro-Castro forces led by the CIA. That Sturgis was involved in helping the CIA organize the Bay of Pigs invasion, for whose ultimate failure was blamed on President Kennedy. Sturgis recruited 19-year-old Marita Flores, who was close to Fidel Castro, and she took CIA pills, which were hidden in her face cream, basically to poison Castro. The plot failed. According to Lorenz, she met Sturgis again before Kennedy's assassination in 1963. And she's the one that basically was hitchhiking to Dallas with a whole bunch of people that's from members of Operation 40, which is, in my opinion, Gladio. And this was the whole implication that it was the Gladio operators from the Cuban exile community that was responsible for JFK's assassination, and not the OAS people that were flown in from Otto Skorzeni's training. And she rode along and was eventually in the New Orleans area kicked out of the car. And that's how the prosecutor Garrison, that was the only one that actually did an investigation into JFK's assassination, came across her, is because she showed up unexpectedly in the New Orleans area, which is where he was located. So this is the same woman that was in on all of that. So the operation was concentrating basically the Bay of Pigs and all of the operations that went on. Now that after we were pro-Castro, now we're anti-Castro. The operations were concentrating on Cuba and were operating out of Mexico. So in June of 1972, Sturgis, a guy by the name of Virgilio Gonzalez, Eugenio Martinez, Bernard Barker, and James McCord were arrested while installing electronic listening devices in the DNC campaign headquarters located in Watergate. So now we've got basically Watergate kicking off right on the heels of all of this. We were for Castro, now we're against Castro. So it could have been an entire diversion. You have the White House office telephone number of CIA officer E. Howard Hunt found in the address books of the burglars, almost kind of like they're planting evidence. Reporters were able to link the break-in to the White House. Sturgis was convicted in 1973 with Max Gonzalez and Jerry Buchanan in a federal court in Miami of transporting cars stolen in Texas to Mexico. This prompted the DEA acting director to send a letter indicating that Sturgis had been covertly cooperating with the DEA. So Sturgis served 14 months in a minimum security prison in Eglin, Florida, which was basically the prison that's on the base there where they do like administrative tasks. It was like a slap on the wrist. Sturgis claims that the Watergate burglars had been instructed to find a particular document in the Democrat Party offices. This was a secret memorandum from Castro government that included details of CIA covert actions. Sturgis said that the Castro government suspected that the CIA did not tell the whole truth about these operations, even to the American political leaders. June 20th, 1975, Sturgis stated, "I was a spy. I was involved in the assassination plots and conspiracy to overthrow several foreign governments, including Cuba, Panama, Guatemala, and the Dominican Republic and Haiti. I smuggled arms and men into Cuba for Castro and against Castro. I broke into intelligence files. I stole and photographed secret documents. That's what spies do." Allegedly, 3 tramp photos of JFK's murder was Hunt and Sturgis. So there's a famous photo of 3 kind of homely dressed people in Dallas that day. And a lot of people speculate that the 2 of the 3 was Hunt and Sturgis. Sturgis tries to claim that Ruby and Oswald did it. After the death of Hunt in 2007, John Hunt and David Hunt, the sons of E. Howard Hunt, revealed that their father had recorded several claims about himself and others involved in the assassination. In April 5th, 2007, Rolling Stones, John Hunt detailed a number of individuals implicated by his father, including Sturgis, as well as Cord Meyer, David Sanchez Morales, David Atlee Phillips, and William Harvey. And an assassin he termed the French gunman Grassy Knoll, whom many presume was a guy by the name of Lucien Sarté. The two sons alleged that their father cut the information from his memoirs because those had to be approved by the CIA. Sarté was an alleged gunman that supposedly was involved in the assassination. Sarté was shot to death in Mexico in 1972 in a drug trafficking raid. On April 19th, 1968, Sarté was arrested along with Auguste Record, that's the guy from the Paraguay prison that we extradited here as our big trophy buck for drug trafficking, and a guy by the name of Francois Chiappi, who we come across all the time in Operation Gladio, for questioning regarding a robbery of the branch of the National Bank of Argentina. The three were released back then due to lack of evidence. In April 1972, Sarté was shot to death in Mexico during a raid for drug trafficking. A detective in Rio de Janeiro was later suspended from the police force after being accused of accepting a bribe to free Sarté. Others involved Sarté, Roger Bocanani, and a guy by the last name of Peranti. Some say they were in prison, but it is known that Gladio operations had the ability to set people free in return. So that's another kind of a pattern that I've noticed. Just because somebody has an alibi that they were in prison at the time does not mean they weren't involved. Because these people in the Gladio network, they have people that run prisons. And they are able to, and they did it extensively in Italy. They would escape and go do some of these operations and then be back in the prison. And their alibi was, hey, I've been in the prison the entire time, so I couldn't have done it. When in fact, after the fact, they would find evidence of a witness or somebody that placed them in that position. And you go back and find out that, oh yeah, that prison guard was one of the P2 Masonic order guys that owed $50,000 in debt or had been bribed or whatever. So just because they say they're in prison doesn't mean they are actually in prison. Sturgis was involved in Paraguay, Panama, and with Daniel Ellsbury's, where they broke into his psychiatrist's office. So he was also involved in Miami demonstrations. He was involved in the mining of the Haiphong Harbor in Vietnam. He was involved in the DNC demonstrations and in the Watergate break-in. So CIA officer Walter Minnick, that we talked about at the beginning, writes the plan to roll the BNDD, Adeli, ONNI, and Customs Intel all into this new organization called the DEA. It will end up having 4,000 operatives, 50 CIA agents, many of them trained as part of the Cuban Gladio exile, and 50 from the Customs Intel, all rolled up into the DEA. So you have Ingersoll's BNDD, Ambrose ODALE, Sullivan's ONNI. They all resign, and a new guy is brought in by the name of John Bartels, Bartels, to be the DEA. Bartels was nominated by President Dwight D. Eisenhower back in 1959. Let's see. Oh, because he was a judge. So Bartels was a judge, and he was nominated to the bench by Eisenhower. And let's see. Lucien Conan, the guy that was left out of a job in musical chairs, becomes the head of DEA's Special Operations Branch, i.e. their Gladio capability. He sets up a thing called DEA SOG, special operations, and it actually had an assassination program embedded in it.
What?
They set up a fake company called BR Fox Company on Connecticut Avenue in Washington, D.C. It housed a team they referred to as the Dirty Dozen. He also set up a thing called Decon 1, where it employed Cuban exiles, i.e., Gladio, vets of CIA training terror camps and used CIA clandestine service people who are the exact same people that run the entire Gladio operation. DEA officials would talk about meeting. They would have meetings in this office with the Dirty Dozen about who they were going to assassinate and how they were going to be assassinated. Connecticut Avenue was a safe house for the assassins. There's a guy by the name of which that was a Freudian slip. Mitch Warbell, Warbell the third. Do a look on him. He also spent time in that safe house. So he was in OSS in China. He's a weapons dealer and he's a trained assassin. Warbell said he and Koenig worked together as late as 1974, and he provided them with assassination devices. His big claim to fame, Warbell's, is he has suppressors that he manufactured for military M16 weapons and other machine guns. What better assassin weapon could you come up with? And he did it for multiple different weapon systems, not just the M16. So Warbell worked with Sturgis and the Cuban exiles and a guy by the name of Robert Vesco. And Robert Vesco is another one of those names that comes up all the time in Operation Gladio. So among charges that emerged during the 1970s was an SEC accusation about Vesco embezzling $220 million from 4 different IOS entities. Now, if you've never come across IOS, IOS stands for Investors Overseas Service Limited. It is a CIA front company that was sold as a tax haven for military people that live overseas after their service, and that it provided tax-free investment capability. Basically, he screwed all of the military people out of their money because the entity eventually goes broke, but not before it's being used as a wholesale money laundering operation. That's Robert Vesco. During 1973, Vesco fled to Costa Rica shortly before his departure, hoping to end the SEC investigation into his activities. Vesco routed substantial contributions to who? Richard Nixon, through his nephew, Donald Nixon. That sounds familiar too. Vesco was also investigated for a secret $200,000 contribution made to the 1972 re-election campaign of Nixon. As there's a lawyer by the name of Harry Sears, who was a counsel to International Controls Corporation, who also delivered contributions to the re-election campaign. Vesco wanted Attorney General Mitchell to intercede on his behalf with the SEC. And do you know who the SEC chairman was at the time? William Casey, who goes on to be the CIA director.
Okay.
While Vesco fled the country, Mitchell and Sears were indicted for obstruction of justice as a result of Watergate. Although eventually the charges all get dismissed on those people. So you have Warbell and Vesco was charged with bankrolling, narcotic smuggling. You have a guy by the name of Carlos Hernandez Rumbout, who is a bodyguard of Vesco's close friend and business partner, president of Costa Rica, Pepe Figueres. He's a former Koenig agent who fled the country to avoid prison after conviction on drugs. He has come and went from the U.S. multiple times on U.S. diplomat passports. CIA assassinated in, let's see, CIA actually carried out assassinations both in, well, everywhere, but Vietnam, Guatemala, Argentina, and Brazil. These assassinations were done using drug operations as cover stories. So what they would do is they would stage drug busts under this DEA international arm, and they would actually be assassinations of competitors. So the DEA was picked up. DEA picked up on the operation once it was. Oh, okay. So the CIA was doing this, but then the DEA takes it over once they're set up with the international capability to do it. So until 1974, training for torture and assassinations was solely CIA and USAID office. And guess what the name of the office was called in USAID for this assassination torture training program? The Office of Public Safety.
Okay, jeez.
Some 10,000 Brazilian police were trained, and 523 of them were forwarded for courses in the United States. And that had to do with a international police academy in Georgetown, which is a suburb of DC, at a secret CIA center on R Street under the cover of an organization called International Police Services, Inc. When the school was out, the graduates became CIA advisors responsible for torturing, police repression, and basically moonlighted as death squad members. Huh. That's very similar to the werewolf units that created Gladio. How many kidnappings and murders did they do in the United States? Well, we know of at least one. The guy that was the Chilean ambassador when the CIA couped the Chilean government left one of their ambassadors stranded in the United States, and he didn't want to go back because he knew he was going to be murdered. And his name is Leiter, Lear. And this guy ends up being blown up on the street of Washington, D.C. from a bomb from Gladio, and killed at least one innocent bystander and injured two others. So Uruguay freedom guerrillas, which they called communist, kidnapped and killed U.S. police advisor Dan Mitrone, Mitrione, in 1970. He was in Uruguay fighting. He was hired by the Uruguay dictator to train police forces on how to basically torture and disappear dissidents in Uruguay. So these guerrillas fighting against the dictator kidnapped him and killed him. So when you live by the sword, you might die by it. And interestingly enough, this Mitrone guy was a retired police chief from Richmond, Indiana. He was hired by the Office of Public Safety from State Department and employed by the International Cooperation Administration, ICA, with a contract to go down there and basically do that. Teach these police forces how to torture and disappear people. That's literally, and the same program existed through the University of Michigan State in Vietnam. We've done this everywhere. And our university systems, policing academies, have been intimately involved in it. So anyway, that's enough about him. During these 5 years, he shared, I'm still talking about the police chief. He shared torture techniques that were used by the Brazilian dictatorship. They used them in Paraguay. They used them in Colombia. They used them all over down there. In 1967, he was rotated back to the U.S. and taught for 2 years at the police academy in Washington, D.C. In 69, he was appointed the State Department's chief of public safety advisor in Uruguay. And basically, I cut and pasted some information about him, how he used shock and shocking people's private parts in part of the torture, and some of the things he says. His credo was, quote, the precise pain in the precise place in the precise amount for the desired effect, unquote. He was a freaking idiot. So we get down here because this guy's connected to the Warbell guy. I just cut and pasted a whole bunch of his nasty stuff. Oh, and lastly, on him was he used to, there was lots of witnesses. This went to trial eventually over in Italy because a lot of the Italian citizens in Uruguay was murdered. And so it came out at trial that he was actually using homeless people off the streets for torture technique training to their police forces down there. And that brought up a very interesting question. Is that why we have homeless people? Because they're not trackable. Right?
They're not. And typically, as harsh as it sounds, nobody's going to miss them or look for them.
Correct. So you wonder how many of them go missing and how many of them are being experimented on by Dr. Fauci and the CIA. And it may be why they have no incentive to clean it up, right? Just a thought. And an investigation by a senator showed that the training was still happening. Another school was going on in Los Fresnos, Texas. Now, what's interesting in coming up with this in this dig, when I was like 4 months ago, I was digging into the training in the United States through the Schools of America and the military that was training at Fort Bragg and at Fort Benning. I came across an old military base in Los Fresnos, Texas, and it's where Otto Skorzeny and the European gladios out of NATO was teaching people how to use ordnance, explosives. So obviously you can teach anybody how to shoot at a firing range, but in order to teach people how to do sabotage bombings, it takes a much more open space with more availability to not be noticed. So there's this vast area in southern Texas, not very far from the Brownsville area, that used to be an old military base. It's been abandoned, and that's where they were using it as an explosive ordnance school. And when I came across it in this dig, as it relates to some of these exiled Cubans getting trained there, I knew immediately that we were talking about Gladio. Those are the people that they brought there to do the ordnance explosion training. So it was referred to as a bomb school. They also had a torture school there. It was consolidated. And again, hello, we've got all of these illegal aliens come across the border. If you need a few to practice on, why would you not have a training facility down there? If you're going to teach torture techniques, nobody knows they're here. It was consolidated with a law enforcement training course at Fort Benning, Georgia. And that's the one we talked to a couple of sessions ago about. The Schools of America was closed in Panama. They were literally kicked out. And so they moved that to Fort Benning, Georgia. So Koenig's friend Warbell also has a very large training facility outside of Atlanta to the west, which if you go a little further west, you're at Fort Benning. And it just so happens Warbell calls his training facility the farm. Do you know what else is called the farm? The CIA.
Mm-hmm.
USAID absorbed the International Narcotics Control Program, which included all the police training to camouflage it in another area for the DEA's use. By 1974, DEA had 400 agents in Latin America, and the budget went from 1973 of $2 million to 1974, $12 million. In 1974, Argentina's death squads called Argentina Anti-Communist Alliance, because remember, we couch everything Gladio as anti-communist, because who's not an anti-communist? The mastermind of this assassination death squad was social minister, God, with their names, it just drives me nuts, Lopez Rega, R-E-G-A. He appears on television with the U.S. Ambassador Robert Hill to publicize the two nations' anti-narcotics working together, saying, quote, "Guerrillas are the main users of drugs in Argentina. Therefore, our anti-drug campaign will automatically be an anti-guerrilla campaign as well," unquote. Now, what you have to understand is what he just said. The guerrillas he's referring to are actual freedom fighters trying to get their country back from a dictator that the CIA installed. So he just labeled every freedom fighter a drug user. And he's going to use the US's DEA lethal assassination program to get rid of the leaders of the guerrillas, which are the freedom fighters, and they're going to call it an anti-drug and anti-guerrilla campaign because he just equated the two. And this is the same guy in the same country that loaded up 30,000 people and dumped them in an ocean after he drugged them, because they were killing so many people they didn't have room to bury them all. So, there's some other overlaps with the people from the European network of Gladio that comes down and works in Argentina and Paraguay, specifically Paraguay. Paraguay had high-ranking officers that were profiting off of heroin. One of the guys' name was Christian David. He took part in the extermination campaigns in Argentina, Brazil, and Uruguay. All of the drug network operatives used by the CIA for drug trafficking doubled as assassins, including Chile's Pinochet's secret police, DINA. They were all trained by U.S. operatives. And obviously, there's overlap between the DEA and the CIA throughout the 70s. And we end up eliminating, as I said, all of the Corsican mafia. And meanwhile, we don't arrest any of the big drug kings. We arrest, as illustrated both in Biden's role in the locking people up for first-time marijuana offenses and the convictions while Kamala Harris was the Attorney General of California. So they get large quantities of people, like they're actually doing something, while at the same time leaving all of the drug kingpins in place because they're actually paid for by the government. And while we were working through this, I thought it interesting that one of the Liza and Bridget, who helped me do research, brought up the analogy of how this whole system kind of works when you look at the Pizzagate scenario, where they arrest all of these small-time, not that there's a such thing as a small-time pedophile, but all of these people that are at the low level, but none of the massive blackmailing pedophile rings, they almost never get busted.
Look
right?
at Ghislaine Maxwell.
Right. So there's no offenders, but just the traffickers. So that's what I got.
Well, first, let me tell you, as you're going through all this, one thought that came to my mind, and I went to look it up, but funny, I couldn't find it. But we've all heard the term, release the Kraken. We know Sidney Powell's brought it up. We know other people have brought it up. And for those that don't know, it's an octopus, but it's the size of something that will devour a ship, in the ocean. It's,
Right.
and you hear about the octopus in communism. We're familiar with that. But when I hear the Kraken, I mean, when you're talking Operation Gladio, that sounds like the freaking Kraken.
So, you're so, I can't think of a better person to team with to do this than you, because what was Danny Casolera's name of what he was pursuing?
I don't know.
The octopus. That's what he had labeled what he was researching when they killed him. He kept calling it the octopus, and it had to do with drug trafficking, weapons trafficking. And I would go so far as to tell you that I'm convinced now at this point that Fast and Furious was part of this.
100%. There's no doubt in my mind. And I know an
Yeah.
investigator from that talks about the corruption that existed there. There's no doubt in my mind. And as you describe all these historic operations and establishment of this, I mean, the establishment, and I don't want people to misunderstand. I'm not saying every DEA agent out there is a bad person. I'm not saying that. I don't think the colonel's saying that. I won't speak for the colonel. But people got to understand that you can be a lower level rank and file guy that's trained on operations, trained to look for this, and you're going to go do your job at the direction of someone else. And you can only operate off the info that's given to you. And there's this, what we call this leadership structure, or what's a command structure, that as people get to certain positions, you just learn, well, if there's no obvious thing that I'm being told to do, and I'm not talking about the covert stuff. I'm just talking about the routine investigations of like the DEA and the ATF and the NCIS. You think you're doing what's right. You don't, and it's so, and because everything's so compartmentalized, it's hard to detect this stuff unless you watch a show like this one, where some of these agents can be like, hold on. There's no way I'm doing this stuff. I guarantee you there's a DA agent that's watching this show and that's like, no, I'm a good guy. I'm putting my life on the line for the right things. I believe you are, but you need to start looking at what's the big picture look like. Start asking questions to some of these things and see what kind of pushback you get. See if you don't find yourself in an internal affairs investigation, and see if you don't find yourself getting fired. There's a way to facilitate corruption with good people by compartmentalizing these things. I see, it's why I brought up the Seth Rich, because it just reeks Gladio. It's why
Correct.
when I look at MS-13 and when people go research it, Mara Salvatrucha, when you go look at El Salvador, well, we had the military that trained people in El Salvador. People need to research that. But beyond that, MS-13 didn't actually originate in El Salvador. You're looking at Americans, MS-13, or I'm sorry, Mexican Mafia, 18th Street Gang, these people that went and got pushed over there. And then we look at special forces from the Army's Delta Force. I forget what the gentleman's name was, that trained some of these guys in what? The torture, the kidnapping, everything that you hear the colonel talking about. You look at what's the crisis that we've been told with this nation, I believe starting in 2019, maybe 2020, fentanyl. We're hearing this huge drug fentanyl crisis, which I'm not going to say it's not. There's lots of people that are dying, hundreds of thousands of people that are dying. But who's the one in charge of going after this fentanyl crisis? The DEA. I am convinced that Operation Gladio is still in operation. I am convinced that the upper echelons of these three-letter agencies are facilitating all these things. I am convinced that the same way you have all these people that we've went through that are going to be linked down in the description below, that there's the modern day version of those people, and we need to start working backwards. You have so many digital soldiers on here, so many citizen journalists. There's so many people that want the truth and that are seeking the truth. This is your chance now for each one of you to start picking apart these headlines. Who was the agent in charge of said operation at Eagle Pass? Who was the agent at said operation down in the Calexico border? Who start looking at who they are. When did they come into the positions with U.S. Customs and Border Patrol? Or when did they come into their positions with the ATF or the DEA? Who did they work with? And start tracking these people back. And chances are you're going to come across these names that the colonel has laid out to you. Why? Because this is the U.S. Operation Gladio. You're looking at the control of the drug trafficking. You're looking at the agencies, at control of the agencies that are supposed to stop the drug and human trafficking, weapons trafficking. You're looking at the intel agencies. You know, we were talking about COINTELPRO, but we're also looking at, for people that don't know, and I've talked about it on other shows, not specifically about this content, but where I've brought up LA Clear. LA Clear is an intel hub here on the West Coast. It's coast to coast. We have these things. Now, I was told as a cop that these type of central intel hubs were to prevent blue on blue crime. So if I'm working undercover, I don't get in a shootout with another undercover agent. And it's like, okay, that makes sense. But guess who else has access to these central intel hubs? The feds. So if I'm looking up and researching MS-13, if I'm looking up and researching a fentanyl investigation, and I come across a major player, guess who knows that I'm doing that? Because I'm trained to put this into LA Clear. And I'm not saying the people at LA Clear are bad, but what I'm saying is the feds have access to this. So if I'm looking at a player they don't want me to look at, guess all of a sudden I'm getting switched to a different mission, or all of a sudden I go and I hit this house and I'm like, what? No, my internal operational security, I had this on lockdown. How did this guy know to move facilities? Why? Because he's part of this U.S. Operation Gladio, where the feds, the DEA, the CIA, they're all a part of it. And I hope people are seeing that picture here. We're using historic events to show how it worked, but the colonel's doing a phenomenal job of explaining what it looks like. So all we have to do today is just change the names and change the operations, but it's right in front of us. I mean, this is just wild, Colonel.
So I was looking up, and I will shoot you so that you can include it in the show notes. But there is a particular. So I have often made the assertion that, based on the limited amount of information that has been made available in the research that we've done, that the entire cartel setup in Mexico is part of the CIA's doing. In a book that I just finished reading, and I was just breezing through it real quick. I don't see where it is, so I'll find it and shoot it to you. It actually says there was like, I don't know, 4 or 5 families that it said was kind of the kingpins of the cartel system. And it went through and basically documented some loose correlation to the CIA. What I found interesting is the researcher had established at least one of them was actually Cuban. They were not Mexican at all. And I found that very interesting from the perspective that the entire structure of the Mexican cartel system can be, I would actually make the assertion that it is not organic at all. The entire thing has been created and overlaid into Mexico to be able to. So another assertion that they made was the fact that, for plausible deniability, the Nixon administration repeated often and very authoritatively that the drugs was coming from Mexico. The drugs were coming from Mexico. Okay, well, just because a drug that started in Taiwan comes up through a network of cartels in Mexico doesn't mean the drug's coming from Mexico. It means it's transiting Mexico. And so in many cases, when it came to the opium, the origination of them was Taiwan. Then they were put on they go over from Taiwan to Hong Kong in smaller shipments, and then they were loaded on massive freighters from Hong Kong to Sicily. It was refined in Sicily and then brought in through South America, the Bahamas, Cuba at one time, but the Dominican Republic, Mexico, they send them through multiple routes into the United States. And there's an entire mafia network in Canada, in the Northeast, that they come in from the northern border into New York from Canada. That's a whole nother network. And so the Nixon administration, because they wanted to shoot a few people in Mexico and say they were actually attacking the drugs, made the assertion that the drugs here were from Mexico, when in fact, after Nixon left, there was a research project did, and 80%, because you can tell by the quality of the heroin if you do an extensive examination on it, where it came from, and 80% of the heroin in the United States came from Taiwan at the time, and this was back in the 70s.
And then
We've been lied to about everything.
And I know from firsthand information how important military logistics is in Taiwan. So let me ask you this, Colonel. If I say it right, Guyana in South America.
Mm-hmm.
How often do you come across this little country?
Well, that's like I said, there's just like a mind meld going here. We just started a project on Guyana because
I gotta tell you, I promise you guys, me and the Colonel do not script this stuff.
Not at all.
I promise you guys. Colonel gives me a little teaser about what we're going to talk about, and then we just roll with it. So trust me, the Colonel has never heard me mention Guyana to her. So please continue.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to report on it, but I can tell you that it does appear, for some reason, and I think it has to do with who owns what there. There's a lot of the international syndicate owns some interesting things there. So for some reason, they were left out of a lot of the turmoil and the massive killing that a lot of the other South American. So I know there's something there, and we've just started kind of a deep dive there. We got sidetracked actually with Haiti, because let me just tell you, Haiti has Gladio all over it. And I don't know whether your audience knows, but in the Dominican Republic, it has been a drug transiting entity. We couped president there as well. We couped the Haiti government at least 4 times that we could come up with. Haiti, 200 years ago, was the first country in the world to throw off colonial power. And 3 different countries tried to colonize it, and they defeated every one of them. That had never happened in the history of the world. And the European colonialists hated them ever since. And we sent our Marines in there about 100 years ago to occupy it for quite a long time. So, and again, they resisted until the point where we licked our wounds and came home. So Haiti has a very interesting history. They also have 20 billion with a B dollars worth of gold that Hillary Clinton's brother got a mining contract for a long time ago, but the Haiti Constitution doesn't allow it to be mined. So this Canadian company that Hillary's brother was affiliated with was never able to, even though they spent like $300,000 in initial mining assessments, they were never able to recoup that. So, of course, they're pissed off. And until Haitian constitution is changed, it's not legally allowed to be mined. And every time any of the miners got anywhere near it, even to do tests, the countryside would rise up and attack them. So that's the reason why they are being destroyed from the outside, is because they are a very proud people. And just so that your audience knows, barbecue got his name because his mom had a barbecue stand when he was a little kid. He was named Jimmy, which a lot of people were named that, evidently. I don't know why, in Haiti. And so they nicknamed him Barbecue because of what his mom did. It's not because he's a cannibal, it's because he is one of the freedom fighters. He has been attacked. He was a policeman for a very long time, not unlike yourself. And he was basically fired because he wouldn't go along with corruption. He stood up to them and they fired him. There's a guy that lives in a subdivision that's next to where he's from, and he is a corrupt cop. And he has done everything he can to try to destroy the neighborhood where Barbecue lives, and to include bringing bulldozers in and starting to bulldoze people's houses that are Jimmy's neighbors. He put a girl that was a very close family friend in a barrel and set her on fire and killed her. And they murdered a little boy that basically Jimmy had adopted and raised practically. He didn't live in his house, but he was very close to him. So they have personally attacked him by murdering people that are very close to him, to get him to stop rebelling and trying to get all of the people in Haiti together to fight off the oppressors, which is the United States as well as European interest. And I wish him all the luck. And I do believe that we are definitely on the wrong side of this one. But the good news of this is, now that we wear Gladio glasses, within 24 hours, me and the two girls that work on this stuff with me, we had all of this figured out. We had videos, we had everything. I've posted it on X, a lot of it. The Gladio camps, they're actually across the border in the Dominican Republic. In case y'all don't know, Haiti shares, it's an island, but it's both Dominican Republic and Haiti on the same island. And on the border of Haiti and the Dominican Republic, they have set up so much international presence on that border inside of the Dominican Republic to destabilize Haiti, that there is a phenomenon going on in the Dominican Republic that we know that these aid workers and these people that go in that are internationalists have either consensual sex or non-consensual sex with locals. And in the Dominican Republic, if you are born illegitimate, you're not authorized to have a birth certificate. So there are, they call them invisible children. There's no record of them existing. There's also no record of what happens to them. And they have come up missing. And so there is so much tragedy associated with this that can be attributed to Operation Gladio forces in this international syndicate at work. But the good news for me is that now that we know how to look at stuff and the terminology that they use and how they situate themselves, it's a lot easier to call it out initially and for us to pile on collectively together. The guy that got killed about 4 years ago, the president, the guy that's in there that just left in exile, was the prime minister that we installed after we assassinated their president. If you go back and look at any of the pictures of that guy that was assassinated, there's pictures of him. He wanted a new flag for Haiti that looks exactly like the right sector Nazi flag in Ukraine. There's pictures of him dancing in some risque, gross outfit with President Zelensky from Ukraine. And we posted all those pictures. So again, you can go in and start finding a lot of the stuff out about these things now that we know what to look at. So that's, to me, is a good thing.
The other thing I want to say too, and you did a phenomenal job, because I was hoping you would go to barbecue and bring that stuff up. Because if you're on social media, what are you seeing? You're seeing the mainstream media and even alternative media that's not doing their homework. Oh, look at barbecues eating someone, always doing this. But when you look at the guy that they're showing that's doing that, and then look at the actual pictures and videos of the real barbecue, it's not the same guy.
Correct.
But they're getting in people's head. Why? Because they want to program you through your television, tell a lie, to immediately associate anything you may hear about what the colonel's explaining. This guy is someone that's actually fighting for his country. The first place your brain's going to go to is there's no way he's a good guy. I saw a video of him eating someone. But did you?
So what we just showed in looking at the past is the Argentine guy saying the guerrillas are drug users. Therefore, I'm going to use the drug program to kill the guerrillas, without telling the world that the guerrillas are actually the freedom fighters fighting against the dictator. So I'm giving you the exact same thing in real time. They are doing that exact op on Haiti right now. Don't be stupid. Realize that anybody that the mainstream media gangs up on and vilifies, immediately your brain, if you have your Gladio glasses on, should say, that guy's probably good. And whoever they tell me is bad is probably good. Anybody they tell me is good is probably bad. And then do your research.
I was trying to see if I could find the name real quick. Did you ever see the movie Training Day with Denzel Washington, Ethan Hawke?
I'm not a movie watcher.
I'm a huge movie watcher. Like, that is my thing, you guys. People can make fun of me all they want. I do not watch chick flicks. Disclaimer. Anything you hear about that is a lie. But there's this movie. So in the movie Training Day, it's, LAPD detectives. Denzel Washington plays the head of this elite team that everybody wants to get into. Of course, it's a cop movie. It's another reason I really liked it. And there's this cop that wants to get into this unit. Ethan Hawke is the actor that plays it. But Alonzo, it's everybody wants to get in there, but it's an invitation only type of club to get into this. And the reason I was trying to look up the name of it, because I was trying to remember, did they even call their unit like a special services unit? But anyways, in this movie, Denzel Washington's character Alonzo takes Ethan and his crew, and they go to this. It's a Russian guy, old Russian mob dude. And in the floor of his home, he has like millions and millions of dollars, kind of this guy's nest egg. And what you learn through the movie, and I'm not getting even major spoilers, it's an old movie, anyways, but this guy's allowed to do his illicit crimes because there's this mutual understanding that you're giving this team intel they need every now and then to take down these people that justifies the existence of their team. But however, during the movie, Alonzo kills the wrong guy that happens to have important ties to the mob. And the only way, and so there's a contract that gets put out, greenlit, the contract to kill the lead detective, Denzel Washington's character. And the only way out of this contract is you got to pay a hefty amount. And I don't remember if it's $1 million or $10 million. And he only got, this where Alonzo kills this guy is in Vegas of all places, right? But and they're in LA. So there's only one place he knows of to get this money right away. And it's to take it from his Russian counterpart. And so I want to play this clip from the movie. I'll probably play about 3.5 to 4 minutes of it. But it's at the scene where they just broke into this Russian's house and they're going to kill this guy. So disclaimer, you guys, this is a movie that does have foul language. It's a movie that's going to show a kill scene right now. And then I'll explain afterwards why I want to show it. So let me bring it on the screen. We'll have a little bit of a Hollywood moment for a second. We'll come back from.
Freeze up! Down on the floor! Get down, motherfucker!
What are you clowns doing here?
Hey, new guys, watch him! He moves, cap his ass! Yeah, I'm on him.
You know what you're doing, son.
Drop what's in your hands before 0. 5, 4, 3, 2.
Boom. Give me a reason. Lonzo's gonna have you all's ass.
What's up, Roger?
What's going down, brother?
Oh, it's all good, baby. It's all good. you.
What am I supposed to do with this? Wipe my ass?
Bad news, dog. You don't mind if I have some of your $300 glass shit there with you? Please. Had lunch with the wise men today. They said you got to render under Caesar.
Fucking vampires want my pension.
Nah, it's nothing like that. They just want to tax you a little bit. You know, they got their boats and mistresses and, you know, house payments. Nothing I can do about it, you know? They're making me do it. I'm just a lowly civil servant.
You're their bitch. What happens to me?
I got your back, bro. I promise you never have to go back to prison. You ain't even gonna miss what we take. Sorry, orders is orders, dog.
No, you ain't, cop.
Tim, Jeff, Jake, we're gonna work in the kitchen. Grab the tools, give me the bitch. You guys, hold them down.
Who's paying for my floor?
The city. Right here.
Ow!
That's it. That's what I'm talking about.
What's in here, Coke?
Don't worry about it. We'll see. Yeah, grab that hammer right there. Knock this lock off. Yeah. 1, 2. That's $250,000 you're holding right there in your hand. Over $4 million in here. First day on the job, you hit a $3 million seizure.
Wait, he said 4.
Taxation without representation, brother. Nothing's free in this world, you lucky first day motherfucker. Buy your wife a minivan with that, put the kids through college. Give me that bag.
You know. I mean, only checks I cash say LAPD on them, right?
Somebody didn't sleep through ethics, did they?
What's the matter? You don't want a piece of this? Huh?
Well, no. Right? No, like this. I mean, no.
No? Right. Okay. First time. You're not comfortable. I'll hold it for you. Okay? What about you? You comfortable?
Oh, I'm comfortable.
How's your comfort level?
I'm very comfortable.
Come on, let's wrap this up. Don't touch a thing. Evidence.
All right. So with that clip you guys just saw, and the reason that I share it is this clip from Training Day, this is what I see as like the visual representation of how these Gladio units work that exist in the LAPD, the NYPD, and all these major, metropolitan agencies. You saw Alonzo there. They've always known that, the mafia guy Rogers had this money, these, $4 million, what he calls his pension. And Alonzo needs to get out of hot water. He needs to pay the powers that be. So he's going to go and he starts offering Ethan Hawke, here's your $250,000. And Ethan Hawke's like, no, man, I'm not corrupt. Only checks I cash say LAPD. Hence the good guy in a circle of werewolves, right? And Alonzo's like, all right, you guys, because the guys are looking at him like, we need to take him out too. Because the following scene is when they actually go and they kill Roger and they try to get Ethan to do it. But this is the way it works. And we bring this to, to Haiti as an example, the Clintons, the Clinton Foundation, however you want to look at it, they've known that $20 billion worth of gold has always been there. But now, because there's a war going on that some of you may not know about, and you're going to learn about as we continue going on. And in this war, we are trying to take the money away from Operation Gladio, or the deep state, the cabal, or the international crime syndicate, whatever you want to call it. So now what do they got to do? They got to go back to Roger's house, and they got to say, hey, we need this money to continue funding our operation because people are taking our money. And so as you were explaining all that, Colonel, it was this movie clip came to my mind. I was like, let me just show a little bit of Hollywood here. That's this kind of this visual representation at the very nanoscale of what this looks like, but this is what happens, and I'll give it back to you, Colonel, to kind of wrap up the show.
So it's interesting that you say that. It's kind of like this is fortuitous again, because one of the things we keep noticing is never has the CIA been so desperate to get appropriated money to a foreign government. They have always operated on a massive black market money cushion. Where's that cushion? Why are they blowing up a pipeline? Why are they revealing these Gladio units on the border to push the Congress? And they keep pushing. Oh, well, hey, how about if we do October 7th and bring Israel in? So we'll lock Ukraine's funding with Israel so we can push this money out. Why the sudden desperate need for appropriated money if you still have all your black market money? Where is it? So it leaves a lot of supporting evidence that something significantly has changed in their network. And I think that clip probably does a better job of explaining that. Something desperately has changed.
It makes me nervous because now, looking at Taiwan through my Gladio glasses, it's like, how are we not going to have a conflict there?
But as soon as it comes to the forefront, we will do to it exactly what we've done to Ukraine. We demonstrated unequivocally that Ukraine is not what our government tells us. Go ahead and I dare them to change the focus to Taiwan. I dare them to change it because I already know what's going on in Taiwan. I dare them.
Don't open Pandora's box because the Colonel's ready for you guys. Colonel, wow. Part 6, wow. It's just, Colonel asked me, if I would agree or have an alternative, theory at the beginning of the show. And I think you guys, if you've been tracking my opinion, I'm 100% on board with Colonel and what she's articulated in this show. And it's just, man, you made it hit home because of what I did for a career.
Correct.
And there's so many things. There's some things I even, want to talk to you about over the next few days offline of coincidence or revelation. It's just, and some of that stuff kind of made my stomach turn, because there's just things, there's dots you connected for me on a personal scale of people I've worked with and things that I noticed that now hindsight's always 2020. Then I'm like, man, there's a lot of corruption that exists and there's a lot of exposure that needs to take place. And it's going to be shows like this, because if I noticed it, guess what? There's going to be another really good cop. There's going to be another really good agent somewhere that's going to be like, man, she just connected some dots for me. And that ripple effect of the good people in the good places looking for the bad stuff is how we're going to get this exposure. This is the information warfare right here.
That's the good side of it.
And Colonel, release the Kraken. I just gotta say it. You are exposing it, and you know what? Divine intervention. Dates matter. For those that haven't watched the other shows, the day that Operation Gladio went perfect, Colonel just happened to be at the epicenter of where that took place. And I think that was something that the man and the creator put you there when it happened, so that today would make sense that Colonel, this ain't coincidence. You are exactly where you need to be, exposing exactly what you need to be exposing. And I think the world is going to know how important of a part you have played in bringing to light the truth.
Well, but I say the same thing about you too, because if you hadn't taken the the risk and doing a show like this, and this is your livelihood, it is a risk. And you bring on people and you have you're taking a chance because there's a lot of wackos out there. And honestly speaking, when I first came across Operation Gladio, I thought the entire thing was a wacko thing. I couldn't believe it. How does this exist? But there's once you see it and once you understand the language, it's I'm very hesitant to speak on something as being part of Gladio because it's so easy to go, oh well, that's Gladio, and it's like everything. Oh, that's Gladio. Unfortunately, so much of it is, and I keep coming back. No, it's probably, I mean, it's illegal and it's bad, but how do you see Gladio in this? And when I started going through this particular research project on the Cuban exiles, I'm like, they even talk about anti-communists. They even talk about the Anti-Communist League. They even talk about their one part of it, and we can go into it another time, but I mean, the words were all there. And so I had already made my decision that that's probably what it was without ever even getting to the buzzwords. And then once I got to the buzzwords, I'm like, I can't believe this. My head just explodes. But anyway.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed this show. For the audience, I know Colonel put a lot of names out there, talked about different operations, different locations. I have all those links, so I will be incorporating all those in the description below. So you always see the summary of the show. You'll see Find My Guest, which will have all the Colonel's links. And then about midway, maybe 2/3 of the way down the description, you're going to see something that's called show links. And that's going to have a majority of the material that was referenced in today's show. With that, Colonel, do you want to give us a teaser on what we got coming up next?
I'm probably going to I need to go back into where we left off real world correlations. So I really want to get back to the historical part of it and go through some of the actual operations in a little bit more depth, because what I do believe, when operations come up in the future, understanding how some of them were carried out is critical from an analysis standpoint. So I do think we'll probably go back to where I had left off in the history before Ukraine and Haiti and everything else kicked off, and then me finding these crazy Cuban exiles. But anyway, that's what I plan on.
Well, there you guys have it. It's Wednesday night, you guys, and Wednesday night is the X's Spaces Profile Spotlight. So stay tuned. I'll let you guys know who the pick was this week. We'll get into my final thoughts, what we got coming up next week. So stick around, and I'll see you guys.
Welcome to the next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
Are you worried about the effects that higher inflation rates will have on your investments? Are you trying to secure your retirement savings against losses, but you notice that inflation is a hot topic these days? But how dangerous are low inflation rates on your retirement savings? An inflation rate of 2% may not seem like much, but it means that prices will just about quintuple over the lifetime of the average American. And 4% average inflation rate means that something that costs $1 when they're born will cost $23 when they die. That demonstrates the danger of even low inflation rates. So when it comes to gold and inflation rates, many investors want to know whether inflation rates have an effect on gold prices. What history indicates is that over the long term, increased inflation should lead to correspondingly higher gold prices. From September 1971 to August 2020, gold grew 7.5 times as much as inflation. Not only can an investment in physical gold help protect your assets against the damage done by inflation, it can also help grow the value of your retirement portfolio over the long term. If you're looking to protect your retirement assets, why wait until stock markets crash and gold begins to rise in price?